to our class meditation on the 5th day of May, 1954, here in the chapel on Sunrise Ranch. And it's a beautiful day, a lovely day, springtime in the Rockies. It's spring now. We begin to see the budding of the leaves and the many evidences of the resurrection and the life in Mother Earth. We've been considering something of the principles in relationship to Mother God. We have been in the habit in time past of speaking of Mother Earth, realizing how much of the blessings of life come from the earth, how essential. We also realize that nothing could come from the earth except by reason of the sun. So actually, if we are justified in saying Mother Earth, we would be justified in saying Father Sun in relationship to the physical sun of our solar system, wouldn't we? Mother Earth and Father Sun. Because the earth could not bring forth anything except for the sun. And the basic energy pattern which we utilize in life physically as human beings and in relationship to food and heat, everything, all derives from the sun. So if we're going to talk about Mother Earth, we should just as freely talk about Father Sun, and we must not let ourselves get confused on that basis in relationship to Mother God. But these two aspects of creation give us an out-manifestation of the basic principles in relationship to invisible deity. The Father aspect of God is symbolized by the sun. And in that connection we note that while there were religions in time past that degenerated to a mere worship of the sun as an orb, that most of the reference to so-called sun worshippers of the past is misleading. To call them sun worshippers is a misnomer. We recognize that they recognized that the sun was a symbol of God. While they acknowledged the symbol of God, they did not conceive the sun as such to be God. But our modern students of ancient beliefs and peoples have not adequately recognized that distinction. But we need to bring it into the pattern a bit in our own understanding in order to better comprehend the significance of the pulsation of cycles, the pulsation, the rhythm in nature. We think of spring and fall, winter and summer, as aspects of the pulsation that works through the earth. And now we are in the springtime. We feel the bursting forth of the life forces in the earth, because the earth has been warmed and given new energy by the sun. Beginning to feel and to know harmony in the rhythms of being is vitally essential. If we are going to understand ontology, which is the science of real being, we must recognize the relationships between visible and invisible being, and we must recognize the part that is played by these rhythmic pulsing cycles. Such pulsations originate in what we call the invisible realm, because they are invisible merely to our physical perception. But to what degree do we as human beings allow the pulsations from deity to extend out into the earth? In the days to come, when you're giving an attunement, you will probably notice some very interesting factors in relationship to rhythm, pulsation, and cycles. What are you doing when you give an attunement? We say we are undertaking to help the individual come into attunement with God, and that is true. What am I doing as I serve you here? I'm working to help you come into attunement with God, the Father aspect of God and the Mother aspect of God. And we remember the commandment, thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. And instead of thinking of a geographical location like Palestine or the United States or Colorado or some other place, the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee is the land of your own body, your physical body. That thy days, thy life may be long in the physical body. Thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother, that thy life may be long in the physical bodies which the Lord thy God giveth thee. And if we're going to honor father and mother, God, how can we do it better than to begin to receive into manifestation the atmosphere, the meaning of Father and Mother God? And so, bringing you into attunement with God means what? Bringing you into attunement with the cycles, the natural, divinely ordained cycles, the pulsations of being. And what do we mean when we say divinely ordained? All too often the human mind limits the concept of something divinely ordained to something arbitrarily established by some being somewhere that is called God. But these things are not arbitrarily established. They were established as the only means by which the given result could appear at this level of creation. No other way. It couldn't be any other way. The laws of God are not arbitrary laws. They are the laws of being, not to be resisted as if we were compelled like slaves to conform to unreasonable demands, but the very laws of our being which should be eagerly recognized and accepted in relationship to ourselves, because we know that any deviation from correct function under those laws in the pulsation of being is going to bring difficulty of some sort. And so, my work here is to help you to come into attunement with, harmony with, the pulsations of being, of real being. Physically, yes, mentally and emotionally, spiritually. As the mind begins to be aware, consciously aware, of the pulsations of being in relationship to the level of intelligence, you find it easier to think, easier to see things to which before you were blind. and in the feeling realm. As we become aware of pulsations so that we can harmonize with them, we feel a richness in life, a fullness, a beauty, which before was unknown. These pulsations, we see them in relationship to the sun and the earth, the seasons which God ordained. These seasons, as they now manifest, are a distortion of what God ordained. For He did not ordain the severe winter time. He did not ordain the severe heat of the summertime. There were changes of climate in the earth as God established it, yes. Some places warmer than others, some places cooler than others. In the higher elevations there were variations from the lower regions. And it was cooler in the northern parts than in the equator. But we did not have this extreme wobble in the axis of the earth. The equator, as we speak of it, was nearer a constant centering. If we have something that changes the physical earth as such, so that it goes through these, or this complete wobble, shall we say, every year, once a year, a complete wobble. And in this wobble is this severe. What happens to the atmosphere? The forces that control the wobble are not centered in the Earth's envelope of atmosphere. They're centered in the physical Earth itself. So the atmosphere has to follow the Earth. And as it follows, we have various patterns of turbulence in the atmosphere, not altogether established on the basis of heat and cold, although that is the primary force that we are aware of. But the thing that we're considering is that as the Earth wobbles, there are constantly changing patterns of depth in the atmosphere in relationship to the Earth. The deepest part of the atmosphere is over the equator. The thinnest part of the atmosphere is over the poles. This is a result of centrifugal force, etc., as well as gravitational pulls. Now, if we had just a little wobble instead of such a big one, just enough to keep the changing seasons in a rhythmic pattern, enough to get away from sameness, monotony. The basic pattern of the Earth's atmosphere being thick at the center, over the equator, and thinning toward the poles, would allow a pattern of heat distribution over the Earth that would be quite different from what we have now. That is what we had in the days of the motherland. The heat distribution through the atmosphere, because the penetration where the atmosphere is thick would be slower, and where the atmosphere is thin, it would be more rapid. And the radiation pattern would be different. Instead of having one pole at a time in darkness for so many months, where the cold collects and becomes severe, to be released in currents out over the Earth, the poles would be virtually in daylight all the time, instead of in darkness 6 months out of the year. That would mean that we wouldn't have the severe development of cold at the poles to disrupt the pattern of the Earth's atmosphere. Consequently, the whole situation would be different. I point this out briefly only to emphasize the fact that the seasons as we now know them are not the seasons as the Lord ordained them. They are exaggerated. But we still have the illustration of the pulsations, the natural ebb and the flow. And with everything there must be a pattern of pulsation if there is to be a pattern of life. When we contact an individual, a person, we recognize that no matter how healthy that person may be in body and mind and heart, the seasons, the pulsations there are at least a little off-key. There is no such thing as a person living on the face of the earth today where the pulsation patterns are perfect. No matter how good that person is, no matter how well centered. Now, if you say that is true, why should we be centered? Because, in the first place, the nearer we are to the perfect pulsation pattern, the better health and joy, happiness we will have. But the Lord needs someone to work through, to give the earth itself an attunement. It's not merely a matter of giving an attunement to human beings in a scattered or personal sense. It's a matter of developing a pattern which will permit the physical earth as a planet to be given an attunement, so that we can establish a control pattern that will begin to modify the difficulties we have in relationship to the elements. People talk about God controlling the elements. Well, actually, the elements are not controlled in the sense that God would control them if we would let Him. They are functioning on a more or less haphazard basis under the conditions which are prevalent. And if we say, well, now, if we have the proper power or proper prayer or something, we could cause it to rain or stop raining or the wind to blow or stop blowing or something of that nature, as if the localized condition were the thing to be brought under control. We are functioning on a basis of ignorance. It doesn't work that way. The control pattern in relationship to the elements goes back to the fact of the earth's wobble. We can have a certain degree of modified influence or control in spite of that wobble in its extreme expression. But if we were going to have dominion over the elements, we would first have to establish dominion over the earth so that in the pattern of attunement it could be brought out of its extreme wobble. Also, I believe this is touched upon in your other classes in season, but we have 365 days, roughly speaking, in a year. That isn't what God ordained. We're just a little bit further away from the sun than we're supposed to be. We're supposed to have a year of 360 days. We're 5 and a fraction days out. 5 1/4 approximately. Now, if we had a day for a degree in the circle, so that being just a little bit closer to the earth, or the sun, moving at exactly the same speed around the sun, we would complete the cycle or circle in 360 days. We would have a basic pulsation, correct, as God ordained it. Now, if the Earth had been thrown out of pattern another 5 days, shall we say, so that we had a 370-day year instead of what we do have, man would have been destroyed from the face of the earth. In other words, there's a comparatively narrow range there. If we got too much closer to the sun, we would break the vibratory rhythms upon which man was created. This basic pulsation of the rhythm of our movement around the physical sun is of first or primary importance in movement toward the absolutely ideal state. Now, our job is to produce as nearly the ideal state as we can under these vibratory patterns. The cycle of the earth around the sun and so on, which for the moment we cannot change. But if we will produce the best possible conditions under the vibratory factors as they exist in the solar system, we will reach a point where we can begin to cooperate with God in restoring the body of the earth itself to its proper rhythms. The proper cycle around the sun, 360 days, just a little bit nearer the sun, and the proper degree of wobble involved. Now, there are many interesting things which we might consider in that regard. There is a comet. And all the comets that we become aware of, remember, are a part of our solar system. Those comets, which come in the range of our perception here, are just as much a part of our solar system as the planets are. And that's something that most people do not adequately realize. Some of those comets are supposed to be comets. Others, or one in particular, is not supposed to be a comet. It's supposed to be a planet. That's another one of the factors that has broken the vibratory rhythm in our solar system. We won't take time this morning to examine into how what was once a planet became a comet, and how that is now a comet must become a planet in the solar system itself before we can have the absolutely ideal conditions upon the face of the earth. But briefly recognizing that, we can see how the lack of this planet in our solar system, functioning as a comet, is disturbing the vibratory factors of the planet and the solar system as a whole. The fact that we are off-key 5 1/4 days disturbs the vibratory factors in the solar system as a whole, not just this earth. We are inclined to think of our personal salvation as human beings, or perhaps with a larger vision, the salvation of humanity upon the earth. But we forget that what may be called the plan of salvation involves a correcting of ill conditions which extend throughout our solar system, because these breaks in the pattern influence not only the earth but every other planet in the solar system, and it breaks up or disturbs the vibratory rhythms and pulsations which come to us from the sun. So until we have the earth back where it belongs, until we have the wobble pattern corrected in the earth itself, until we have this planet back into its orbit so that it's functioning as a planet instead of a comet, we're not going to have the absolutely ideal conditions on earth. Now you say, this job is getting bigger all the time. I didn't know we were concerned about such a big task. It looks impossible. Well, it isn't at all impossible to start with. And if we blind ourselves to these basic factors in the solar system, we'll be trying to do something here which cannot be done. And that's futile, isn't it? Effort, which cannot possibly have fulfillment, is a waste. So, we need to at least briefly recognize these factors so that we get away from trying to do the impossible. Recognizing that the pattern here is not ideal. Now, I haven't asked any of the ladies who play the piano here about it, but it's very possible that this piano needs tuning. Does it? A little bit. It's a little bit out. It's not as bad as it could be, but it's a little bit out. Now, those of you who have a good musical ear might possibly recognize that when a certain key is touched, it doesn't give a note that is exactly true. Now, if the piano is tuned accurately, we have the round, full notes, don't we? They're right, according to the pattern of the piano. So, we have exactly the same thing in the solar system. Let's not imagine it just relates to the Earth here, that it's confined here. It isn't. Because this distortion pattern here on Earth involves a distortion pattern on Venus and Jupiter and Mars and Uranus, Mercury, and all the rest of the planets of our solar system. We need to see that and know it. Not because we are going to quit and say it's an impossible task, but because we need to understand the factors with which we are dealing. Now, for instance, perhaps I could illustrate with a story. And I believe it's a true story. I can't vouch for that, and I may not have the story complete in my mind. But as I recall this story, there was a certain ship at sea which had run into a great storm, and the people were troubled, disturbed for fear of losing their lives. And they were gathered in the cabin, or whatever should be called, the main congregating place on the ship. And in the storm, various ones were undertaking to be a little entertaining or helpful, some prayer, some recitations, and one thing and another, that were designed to help take the people's attention away from the storm, keep them relaxed, keep them quiet. And they were deliberately helping each other. And as I recall this story, there was a great violinist on board. Now, how he could be there without a good violin, I don't know, but apparently he was. And apparently there was a violin that had only one string. And it was a rather decrepit old thing. Wasn't a good violin. Wasn't in any sense complete. But this great violinist got hold of that violin. And he went before this little group huddled there in the raging storm outside. And he began to play on a violin with just one string. He didn't say, I can't. The violin isn't right. It isn't complete. I can't do anything. He took the violin with just one string and proceeded to produce such exquisite music that every person there was moved and touched to the depths of being. Sometimes we may have to play on a violin with just one string. We know good and well that conditions aren't what they ought to be, with any of us. We know that the conditions in the earth itself are not what they ought to be. But If we can make violin music, life music, and a violin with just one string, we'll be helping toward fulfillment. We need to do what we can do with conditions as they are. And as we reach a point of true attunement with God, regardless of the limitations, regardless of the things that are not right, we can begin to reach a point where we can be the instruments through which God can work to give an attunement to the planet and the solar system. You know, I am so very thankful that this comet out there that should be a planet is still a comet. Because if all the planets of our solar system were in position, and one of them at least was not a comet, our position would be hopeless. You know that? We on earth would be doomed to staying in an out-of-tune position forever. There must be a physical means of dealing with physical things. That comet out there is one of the great factors in relationship to the process of restoration to which we are dedicated. In season, and I'm not going to attempt to tell you just how soon, but regardless of Soviet Russia and the Red Menace, regardless of this, regardless of that, the day is coming when that comet that is now far out in space is going to return at a cycle, at a point in the movement of the stars and the planets, and it will establish a physical pattern. If we are functioning correctly, if we have reached a point of working with God, so that a control factor is established here, the return of that comet into our solar system will produce gravitational pulls, rearrangements, some cataclysmic changes, if you please. Oh, there'll be some tidal waves, and there'll be this, and there'll be that. And many people will be thinking of it as catastrophe. But we will be thinking of it as a step toward salvation. Why? Because we know that if we can, under those conditions, hold the right vibratory polarity, so that God has a means of working on earth in relationship to this change, the earth will be pulled back to its 360-day year. The wobble will be rectified, so that it will be back the way it should be. And the planet will settle in to its orbit. You think that can't happen? It did happen. You know, back at the time of the children of Israel, when it was said that the time of Joshua, you know, they say the sun stood still. At that time, another planet, which was up to that time a comet, was restored. Do you realize that two of our planets, both Venus and Mars, they were planets in our solar system? In the cataclysmic changes that took place in the past 20,000 years, both of those planets became comets. And they have both, within the past 20,000 years, the past 3,000 or 4,000 years, in fact, they have both been restored to their positions as planets. There's another one to come. And if it were not so, we would be really in trouble. But stop and consider for a moment, if you need a little bit of connecting substance here, stop and consider how certain of the ancients, as they are called, worshipped the planet Mars, and certain ones worshipped Venus. Two different periods involved. You look out at the sky and you pick out Mars or Venus, and can you, by the wildest stretch of imagination, imagine any human being upon the face of the earth now being so impressed with either of those planets that he'd make them a god and worship them? You can't, can you? To imagine them as gods? Certainly not. Well, they were not in that position which they now occupy in those days. And as they came in, and there was wild changes in the solar system, there were comets which came close to the Earth, disturbed the Earth's pattern of pulsation. And while they were there, fiery monsters in the sky, the superstitious ones worshipped them as gods. Venus was one, Mars another. And they were not in the position where they are now, in the time in history when those planets were being worshipped as gods. And if we stop to think about it, we see how absolutely logical the idea is. We could go on and see that it is actually so. But just to help you connect up a little bit. So we realize that two of the planets of our solar system have been restored already from positions as comets to positions back as planets, as God originally intended them to be. There is another one out there, a planet that is still a comet, that will be coming in one bright day, and it's not too far away. And when it comes in close, we're going to have some cataclysmic changes on Earth, and there'll be a lot of fear, and a lot of superstition, a lot of nonsense. But if we have a control pattern which understands what is taking place, we can work with God at that critical time, and the physical pulls of the planet which is being slowed down and drawn into its course as a planet will help reestablish the pattern with respect to the Earth. And we'll have a new attunement. We'll be back in tune with the cosmos in the solar system. But that is a ways away, and we'd better be prepared for that day when it comes. It's one of the great things of the future, and we're not ready. If that comet came today, we would be helpless to be of very much use in establishing the right control pattern in the solar system. But it is to be done. Now, if we see it in relationship to the solar system, perhaps it will be easier to understand it in relationship to ourselves. And as a matter of fact, you cannot understand such things as cancer, for instance, cells going wild in the body, unless you understand this. You can search from now till doomsday for answers, and you will not get them clearly. In certain cells, there is a tendency, instead of the nucleus dividing into two parts, it'll divide into three. Triplets instead of twins. Just one of the aspects of the problem of cellular division as it relates to such problems as cancer. Well, we are not going to have, in an overall sense, a perfect control pattern in connection with the one-cell organisms of the body or the amoeba until we have a perfect pattern established in our solar system. It isn't there now. We acknowledge that, but we do not quit because of it. We do what we can so that the restoration pattern can be with respect to the whole, and not just humanly, personally seeking for some heaven somewhere where presumably we're going to be at peace and everything's going to be lovely because God made it that way for us. We are here to share with God in creative work. And if it's going to be lovely, God will do His part. But if it's going to be lovely for us, we're going to do our part, or it won't be lovely. And that's what makes the difference between heaven and hell. If we do our part, step by step it will become lovelier, more beautiful and more wonderful, and the living of life more thrilling. But these rhythms are there, the pulsations are there, and for the time being they're a bit off key. Not so far that humanity has perished, but far enough so that we cannot have on earth today the same condition that prevailed before the fall of man. And I think as you go along in your studies, you will understand more effectively how it was that this break came in the pattern at the time of the fall of man. What happened and why. But we are considering the patterns, the pulsations, the seasons, the cycles, as they relate to us in this present day, our responsibility in this field. If we understand this background of the pattern and realize that the music of the spheres, as it relates to our solar system, is not perfect music, it isn't perfectly in tune, perfectly on key, then we will understand why there are certain irritating factors which everyone tends to feel at various times in various ways, which are here and we cannot change them yet. They're there. Of course they're there. We all feel them. Some react more than others, but we all feel them. But we work around them. We do in spite of them. And we can go a long, long way toward the perfect pattern of expression as human beings without coming to the limit of what can be done in the present vibratory pattern of the solar system. If anyone starts saying, well, now I can't be expected to do the right thing because the earth itself is out of key in the solar system, if you start offering it as an excuse, I won't accept it, because we can do a great deal that has never yet been done. We have a wide open field before us, much to be accomplished before we reach the limits of what can be done in the present situation. And if we function correctly, if we will reach the limits of what can be done under this situation, we'll be ready for that comet's return. That comet came fairly close into the Earth's orbit and made some definite changes, close enough to shift things around a bit, at the time of the Master's birth. The comet didn't come because the Master was born. The Master was born because the comet was coming. In other words, from the standpoint of God, the time of His coming was established in relationship to the movement of the comets and the planets, so that the vibratory factors would be right, so that the age cycles would be right, as we've touched upon them before. And they were caused to coordinate. The things that God does are caused to coordinate if we let His will be done. And that comet has gone back out beyond the range of human view, but it came close enough to change things around a bit at that time. Now, we are here in another cycle, given an opportunity to do something so that what has been done already may not be in vain, so that what is yet to be done may be accomplished. And it's a great task, it's a marvelous task, a noble task, but it's not an impossible task, as it might seem to the human vision. Now, to get back to my starting point, when you're giving an attunement, what are you doing? You're helping the individual to come into attunement with the true pulsations that are working through his own body, or mind, or heart. That person being disturbed, depressed, in trouble physically, mentally, or emotionally is not in tune with the pulsations of being which are flowing through. They're not being connected or contacted. They're not connected up, invisible and visible. So, you are helping to establish a field, a creative field, if you please, which begins to help the physical body and its parts, nerves and glands and tissues, organs, to come into the pattern of rhythm with the source of life. Simply a pattern of harmonizing with the rhythms in the body. And the body by itself cannot attain its own rhythms. Over a period of time, a person may do something in that direction by right diet and by outdoor living and by proper rest and so on. All of these things are all right and helpful, but they have a definite ceiling. Only through attunements, or attunement with these vibratory factors which provide the rhythm of being in the body, the mind, and the heart, can we begin to let the things of the Spirit manifest effectively. The individual who is out of attunement in his mind and heart considers something that is, what shall we say, in the current of inspiration, the current of true movement of the Spirit, and he says, no matter how hard I try, I can't do that. I don't believe I ever can. Well, of course, you can't do it that way. The principle is to come into attunement with those natural rhythms and pulsations of being, real being, by which the inner may manifest through the outer. And that is the task before you in your future ministry. Now let me illustrate just a little bit. I have, on occasion, given attunements to people of, what shall we say, extremely distorted patterns. And a well-advanced cancer case we might illustrate. Do you think you could get a control pattern through in such a case? Of course, this individual was in a semi-coma, getting very close to the end. Do you think I could get a pattern through? No. I could arbitrarily establish a pattern, and the atlas, for instance, would move into position. The moment I took my hands away, it would be right back where it was before. It wasn't very difficult to move the atlas under that condition. It just kind of flopping around. But do you think it would hold for 3 seconds after I took my hand away? No, it wouldn't. Absolutely no hold at all. Checking the body patterns, do you think that I could find a basic pattern of rhythm? No. Everything receding. Every vibrational pattern in that body had been broken and distorted. We become disturbed if the bone is broken. We say, oh, this is a tragic thing. A bone is broken. Yes, it's bad enough. But how about the vibratory rhythms and pulsations that are broken? They're really more tragic. You see, we let the medical doctors set the broken bones. It's our business to set or repair the broken rhythms in the body. To reestablish not the position of the bone. You need to understand something about the bones, yes. But it's our business to understand something about the cycles, the rhythms in the body, and how they can be reestablished. In another case, I was giving an attunement, or undertaking to give an attunement, to a woman who had, well, gone off the deep end and was really in a mental institution. She'd been taken out for the day. I wanted to check her pattern. And they had performed an operation. In relationship to that, I won't attempt to describe, but when I started checking the vibratory patterns, instead of finding a pulsation pattern here in the cervical area, what do you think I found? A whirlpool with the vortex centered just about over the atlas. It's very, you might say, take in the atlas and axis area, extending up into the occiput and down somewhat in the cervical pattern. But there was a whirlpool there. And I worked for, I suppose, at least a half an hour to see if I could modify that whirlpool and establish a pulsation pattern in her body. You think I could? No. Under the current, the atlas position changed, but the whirlpool didn't change. Not enough so you could really detect it, so you could do anything about it. Now what happens? As you give an attunement, you may find that the vibrational pattern is all jagged, but under the attunement pattern, you find that from the head down through the spinal column, there you begin to feel, as it clears, a pulsation, a moving up and a moving down. And in conjunction with that, if you're alert to the vibratory patterns, you will also find one working across like that. The true basic pattern of yourself as an individual shows up as a cross in the vibratory patterns of your own being. If we have the true pulsations here, up and down, and the cross, we have the basic foundation for clearing the breakages in the other patterns that are inherent in the body. But if you cannot reestablish that basic pattern of the cross in the body, whatever radiation you give a particular part, it may help for the moment, but it's palliative in its nature. It is not corrective. You can ease some pain, you can do this, you can do that. But bless your hearts, it's absolutely impossible to establish an attunement or radiation current that is of any real and lasting corrective value in the different parts of the body unless you have the cross pattern in your body. And you will learn to feel, whether you have yet detected it or not, learn to feel those pulsations. And you know that as soon as the pattern begins to get away from its jagged, uncertain movement, so it's not in rhythm, it's a faulty heartbeat, so to speak, in the vibrational sense, and the person's heart can be perfectly good from what you might classify as a medical standpoint and still have that break. I don't mean the physical heart. And the pattern begins to have an even pulsing flow. It begins to settle down. And you may feel some whirlpool effects in various parts of the body. You feel these jagged, uncertain, unrhythmic pulsations. And in this particular case that I was telling you about, that whirlpool in the vibratory factor was there. It was just spinning like that, faster than that, just a constant spinning. I couldn't break it up and establish a pulsation. Once or twice, in spite of the vortex there, the whirlpool effect, I managed to get just a hint of a pulsation through, but it was gone the instant I let go of it. There was nothing there to work with. It was too late. We run into those cases where it was too late. It's so much better to find them when it isn't too late, when the natural patterns of life are there. How desperately human beings want to live. How many there are in the world that would gladly exchange their physical condition of today for the physical condition and the life sense of anyone here in the room. Anyone. You have equipment. Every one of you has equipment necessary to doing the job. For you, it is not too late for any of you. But if you go along far enough, that point is reached. Now, it was too late. That whirlpool was there. There's no intelligence to grasp, to understand, no, nothing I could do. So, I didn't try to do something that I couldn't do. Let it alone. Let it work out. The final cause of death in that case was classified as cancer. Cancer, yes, it was. Why? Cells had gone wild. There was no control pattern in her body. No real control pattern. But here we have, in the normal pattern, the rhythmic ebb and flow, up and down the spine and in the crossbar of your being. And that's the true significance of the cross. The rhythmic patterns of the pulsations of life through the body. We could consider other types of problems, but it is not my purpose at the moment to start you in trying to feel out the patterns. That will come later. But rather to help establish in your consciousness an understanding of the basic factors which are involved, all the way from the solar system to you, and on down to the cells, the natural rhythms, the pulsations, the heartbeat in creation. And as we learn to harmonize with the heartbeat of the Creator, so to speak, we begin to be creative. Now, just a little point here that's such a big one. If we begin to realize Father God and Mother God, it isn't difficult to recognize that between the two, or the two aspects of deity, there is a constant rhythmic pulse of love and truth and life. It is there. Constantly, always, everywhere. And as you begin to harmonize with that pulsing rhythm, begin to feel it, begin to know it, you begin to find what it is to be in the arms of Father God, in the arms of Mother God. For love and truth are those arms. And the result that appears from that embrace is life. We begin to feel and know the rhythm of being, not just of springtime in the Rockies, but of Father God and Mother God. Life, the resurrection